So today's episode of Medicrew Masterclass, that is the eighth episode, is a continuation of the previous episode. In our previous episode, we discussed about the pathophysiology of ischemic heart disease in relation to the physiology of coronary circulation. Today, we will be using that knowledge of physiology and pathophysiology to understand why and how myocardial infarction happens, how do the clinical features develop, how can that be explained physiologically, what are the different biological markers of myocardial infarction, what are the different ECG changes and how do they happen, and finally, how do we put these things together to investigate and manage a case of myocardial infarction. So let us start. The first section is on the pathophysiology of myocardial infarction. And as usual, we will start with a few MCQ questions and I'll request all of you to answer. This is your first question. Arrhythmia in myocardial infarction that can be fatal is. So which arrhythmia in myocardial infarction can kill the patient? Next question. Cardiac rupture commonly causes death by which mechanism? Next question. So this is an X-ray of a patient who has suffered myocardial infarction. What does the X-ray tell you? What do you see in the X-ray? So with these introductory questions, let us start discussing the pathophysiology of myocardial infarction. So the first question is, what is myocardial infarction? Reduced blood supply to a tissue is called ischemia, and death of the tissue is called necrosis. So when reduced blood supply causes death of a tissue, that is when there is ischemic necrosis of the tissue, that is called infarction. So quite simply, myocardial infarction will mean ischemic necrosis of the myocardium. And this is considered to be the most severe form of ischemic heart disease. And as we have explored in the previous episode, the commonest cause of myocardial infarction, like all other common causes of ischemic heart disease, is coronary atherosclerosis. So, when there is occlusion of a coronary artery branch by rupture of an atheromatous plaque, there is a zone which stops getting blood. This small area that stops getting blood is the zone which is at risk of myocardial infarction. Then gradually the area starts suffering cell death. And as we have seen in the previous class, the cell death starts from the subendocardial surface and progresses towards the epicardial surface. That is because the subendocardial surface is already under a lot of stretch, pressure, or tension because of the systolic contraction. So normally the blood supply to the subendocardial region is less. So when the overall supply is reduced, then also the subendocardial region suffers the most. So it usually starts with a subendocardial infarction and then into a full thickness infarction, which is called transmural infarction, that is through and through the muscle. So initially there will be a zone at risk, then there will be a zone of necrosis, and the necrosis starts from the subendocardial region, moves over to the transmural region. So this is the evolution from ischemia to infarction. So in general, how do the clinical features of myocardial infarction develop? Let us explore. The most important initiating event of myocardial infarction is presence of coronary atherosclerosis. So there will be some pre-existing coronary atherosclerosis. This coronary atherosclerosis, if it is unstable, will undergo plaque rupture. We have seen in the previous episode that rupture of the plaque causes intravascular coagulation and thrombosis. So rupture of the plaque will now cause thrombosis of the coronary artery. Once there is thrombosis of the coronary artery, blood can no longer reach the myocardium. So there will be myocardial ischemia. As the ischemia progresses, due to ischemia or hypoxia, the myocardial cells start to die. So there is myocardial cell death. The death can occur by multiple mechanisms. It can occur predominantly by necrosis, but there is evidence that this can also happen by apoptosis or by even more specialized ways like necroptosis. So whatever be the mechanism, ultimately the myocardial cells die. As the cells die, they can no longer contract. So this leads to reduced contractility of the heart. As the contractility of the heart decreases, this will translate into a reduction in cardiac output. The reduced cardiac output, on one hand, will send less blood to the tissue, so there will be tissue hypoperfusion. On the other hand, if you remember that the first branch of the aorta is the coronary artery itself. Therefore, if there is reduced cardiac output, even the coronary blood flow will decrease. So there will be reduced coronary blood flow. And this reduced coronary blood flow causes further myocardial ischemia. And you can see wonderfully how a positive feedback cycle or a vicious cycle will start to operate. We know that vicious cycles are very bad for the body. So this will ultimately lead to demise of maximum number of myocardial cells. Along with this, something else is happening parallelly. As there is myocardial ischemia, the myocardial ischemia will generate severe pain. Pain is a very important feature of myocardial ischemia, which is also called angina pectoris. And unlike other parts of the body, we know in heart, pain is carried by the preganglionic sympathetic fibers, not by the classical A delta and C fibers. As pain is carried by the sympathetic fibers, so along with pain, there is almost always a sympathetic overactivity. And the sympathetic overactivity, on one hand, causes some subjective symptoms like palpitations, sweating, anxiety. On the other hand, it causes some functional problem in the heart like tachycardia, like various kinds of arrhythmia. And if you remember that whenever there is tachycardia, the diastolic duration decreases. So there will be a decrease in the diastolic duration. And as the diastolic duration decreases, this will reflect into reduced coronary filling. Also, if the diastolic duration decreases, another major problem that we will face is that there will be less time for the heart to fill. And this also means there will be reduced end diastolic volume. Now, reduced coronary filling will directly reflect into myocardial ischemia. So another vicious cycle starts to operate. And reduced end diastolic volume by Frank Sterling's principle will mean reduced cardiac output. So parallelly, you can see another vicious cycle will start to operate, whereby the cardiac output further reduces. So the whole diagram shows a number of small and big vicious cycles, and vicious cycle leads to death. When there will be severe tissue hypoperfusion, there will be shock, and this shock will be known as cardiogenic shock. In a nutshell, this can explain most of the pathophysiology of coronary artery disease, complicating into myocardial infarction. So, are these clear to everyone? The basic mechanism by which various features develop. Now, let us see how this whole knowledge of the pathophysiology help us in understanding the treatment of myocardial infarction. So, myocardial infarction treatment is largely based on what you are seeing here, the pathophysiology. This is the reason for learning the pathophysiology. As the primary inciting event is coronary atherosclerosis, so a preventive strategy of myocardial infarction will be to prevent atherosclerosis. And this can be done by lifestyle modification, like reduction of smoking and alcohol, healthy food, uh, reducing the sedentary habits, and along with that, drugs like the statins, which reduce cholesterol levels in the blood. Then the plaque rupture leads to coronary artery thrombosis. We can try to prevent the thrombosis in case there is plaque rupture. And this can be prevented by immediately administering tablet aspirin and thrombolytic drugs if necessary. This leads to myocardial ischemia. The myocardial ischemia or reduced blood supply can be helped by various mechanisms. We can give moist oxygen inhalation to increase the arterial oxygen tension. That will improve the arteriovenous oxygen gradient and supply more oxygen to the tissue. We can also give nitrates, which will generate nitric oxide and therefore cause coronary vasodilation. The pain that happens in myocardial infarction can be arrested by adding an opioid. So opioids like morphine can be used to control the pain, which in turn controls the sympathetic overactivity and all the downstream complications. To directly address the sympathetic overactivity, we can give a beta blocker. The beta blocker will reduce palpitations, sweating, anxiety, and at the same time, it will reduce the chance of cardiac tachyarrhythmias. This means there will be improved coronary filling and improved end diastolic volume. So the vicious cycle can be broken. If despite this, the patient is facing tissue hypoperfusion and has developed cardiogenic shock, we can directly treat the shock by use of catecholamines or sympathetic drugs. The drugs that are beta 1 receptor agonist and stimulate the heart includes dobutamine or low dose dopamine. So these are the treatment strategies of myocardial infarction based on the pathophysiology. Is this clear to everyone? Okay, so with this, we move on to some selected mechanisms by which the patient might succumb to death. So this is the overall pathogenesis. I am selecting a few key aspects of the pathogenesis to add a few more lines on that. First is the death due to cardiac arrhythmia. Different kinds of cardiac arrhythmia can happen in myocardial infarction. From tachycardia to bradycardia, different mechanisms of arrhythmia can develop in myocardial infarction. But the most fatal myocardial infarction, cardiac arrhythmia is ventricular fibrillation. This is when the ventricle vibrates instead of contracting. And so the cardiac output just becomes zero. As a result, there is severe hypoxia to the brain and the patient undergoes hypoxic encephalopathy. So why would ventricular fibrillation develop? Ventricular fibrillation is usually a result of multiple ectopics or re-entry circuits inside the ventricular chamber. So why will that develop in a case of myocardial infarction? One proposed mechanism is that there is sympathetic overactivity, as we have already seen. And the sympathetic overactivity can cause excess calcium overload, abnormal depolarization, and this can lead to multiple abnormal action potential. These action potentials are sometimes known as triggered activity. Sometimes these are also known as after depolarization. They're essentially the same thing. And this in turn can lead to various kinds of arrhythmia, including the arrhythmia like ventricular fibrillation. The second mechanism that has been proposed is whenever there is ischemia to the heart, the myocardium starts losing potassium. So potassium goes out of the myocardium. As the positive ion goes out of the cell now becomes excessively negative. So the positive cells that are present surrounding it during depolarization will start sending current into that. So the current sinks into this negative focus. So now there will be abnormal potential differences causing flow of current. And in the language of physiology, this kind of currents are known as current of injury. The same mechanism by which many ECG changes happen. And this current of injury, if it is strong enough, can also lead to the development of ventricular fibrillation. A third mechanism, which is very interesting, that has been proposed is that when there is death of the muscle fiber, we have seen in the previous class something known as systolic stretch happens. Because the dead muscle cannot contract, so blood continues to dilate the heart. So there is dilation of cardiac chambers. This is simply like putting more water in a balloon that cannot contract itself, so it keeps on expanding. So dilation of the cardiac chambers causes increase in length of the myocardial fibers. And as the length of a conducting pathway increase, the chance of re-entry circuit increases. So this can be mathematically proven also, that if the path length is bigger than the wavelength of the cardiac impulse, there is a high chance of development of re-entry circuit. Proving that mathematically is beyond the scope today because it will take some time, but it is a known fact that an increase in length of the fiber causes re-entry circuits to develop. So because of the increase in length of the myocardial fibers, re-entry circuits develop. And development of the re-entry circuit can trigger ventricular fibrillation. So these are some of the many mechanisms by which ventricular fibrillation can happen. And once that happens, the cardiac output becomes zero and the person would die. So one important cause of arrhythmia-induced death is ventricular fibrillation. I hope the mechanisms are clear to everyone. The next important mechanism by which a person might die is development of cardiogenic shock, which we have already discussed. To discuss in a nutshell, there are various reasons why the cardiac output can decrease. Following myocardial infarction, we have seen a number of changes happen in the myocardium. One important change that happens is that there is reduced ATP because there is no oxygen. And reduced ATP means reduced force of contraction. Second is, you have seen in the previous episode that the dead muscle fiber can bulge outward. And this bulging uses a part of the energy that could have actually pushed blood into the aorta. This is called systolic stretch. So whenever there is a systolic stretch, the cardiac output decreases. So there is reduced ATP, there is systolic stretch, there is also decrease in number of living or functioning myocardium. And all these things will ultimately lead to a drop in the cardiac output. And as the cardiac output decreases, when it decreases to a very low level, there will be reduced tissue perfusion. And we have learned in the previous episodes that reduced tissue perfusion is the criteria of shock. So this will lead to cardiogenic shock. So this is how cardiogenic shock can develop in a patient with myocardial infarction. Another important cause of death in a patient with myocardial infarction is cardiac rupture. Now, what does cardiac rupture mean? Cardiac rupture essentially means that the dead part of the myocardium, the part of the myocardium that is already dead, say this part of the myocardium, this can suddenly break into pieces. And as a result of that, the blood from the heart can come out in the pericardial sac. Rupture can happen by various mechanisms. The proposed mechanisms of rupture are: there may be rupture following thrombolysis. So maybe the heart was already damaged and a big clot was holding the heart in shape. Now, after giving thrombolytic therapy, the clot is dissolved and now blood starts to come out of the heart. So here the clot was beneficial, but we have dissolved the clot by thrombolysis. The second mechanism of cardiac rupture may be erosion of the dead tissue. As the tissue is dead, so it's very fragile. And as blood is flowing inside the heart, it can gradually erode the dead tissue. And as erosion occurs, the wall of the heart becomes very thin and prone to rupture. And the third mechanism can be rupture from the junction of normal and ischemic tissue. So simply the ischemic tissue falls apart from the normal tissue, like dehiscence of the tissue. It just separates out because they are different tissues now. There is no cell adhesion molecule between them. And this can also lead to cardiac rupture. Now, whatever be the mechanism of the cardiac rupture, once the cardiac rupture occurs, the ventricle tears off, the blood comes into the pericardial sac. It doesn't go out of the pericardial sac, so there will be no loss of blood as such. So blood accumulates in pericardium. This is called hemopericardium. And this blood will now compress the heart and prevent the heart to fill with blood because there will be external pressure in the pericardial sac. This is known as cardiac tamponade. Tamponade essentially means compression. So someone is squeezing the heart with pressure. And once tamponade develops, there will be reduced end diastolic volume, and the reduced end diastolic volume means there will be reduced cardiac output. So it is by cardiac tamponade and reduction of cardiac output that cardiac rupture ultimately causes death. I hope this is clear to everyone. Finally, one very important cause of death is congestive symptom. Most commonly, it is the left ventricle that usually undergoes infarction. Because we know that in left ventricle blood supply is complicated, doesn't happen during systole. Also, the left ventricle has greater muscle, so more oxygen demand. So if there is a left ventricular failure, that will cause congestion of the left ventricle because left ventricle cannot contract. The congestion of left ventricle will gradually pass backward, so that will cause congestion of left atrium. As the left atrium becomes filled with blood, now the pulmonary veins will be filled with blood. As the pulmonary veins fill up, now the pulmonary capillaries will be filled with blood. And as capillaries have small pores in them, so the fluid comes out of the capillary into the lung, and this causes pulmonary edema. As there will be water in the alveolus, oxygen cannot easily diffuse, so patient will suffer from severe breathlessness, and it can also cause death if it is not treated properly. When you do a sciogram or X-ray of a patient who is suffering from cardiogenic pulmonary edema, the classical finding that you see is that the blood vessels in the hilar region have become prominent. So all these lines and shapes that you are seeing here are the congested blood vessels. These congested blood vessels cause prominent hilar markings. The markings are more below than above, simply because due to gravitation, blood will be more accumulating below than above. And this is a classical picture of cardiogenic pulmonary edema. Sometimes this appearance is known as a bat wing appearance. So I hope this is clear to everyone. There are different complications of myocardial infarction like arrhythmia, cardiac arrest or ventricular fibrillation, heart failure and cardiogenic shock. And delayed complications can be another episode of infarction, that is reinfarction, aneurysm and rupture. And a rare complication is Dressler syndrome, where antibody develops against the dead muscle and starts attacking different parts of the body. And finally, whenever the heart is injured, heart undergoes a process called remodeling, where the normal muscles are replaced by fibrous tissue. So due to this remodeling, gradually, even if the patient survives, the heart will become stiff. And stiffening of the heart will prevent diastole. So gradually there will be restrictive heart disease or diastolic failure. So these are the overall complications of myocardial infarction. So I hope the pathophysiology is clear to everyone. Uh, so let us try the questions that we started with. Arrhythmia in myocardial infarction that can be fatal is. Wonderful. The answer is ventricular fibrillation. Cardiac rupture commonly causes death by. Very good. Hypovolemia. Finally, what does this chest X-ray show? Wonderful. This is pulmonary edema. So with this, we end the section 1 of today's episode. The section 2 is electrophysiology and biomarkers. Now, let us start again with a few questions. ST segment elevation indicates. And if you miss something, you can always watch the YouTube channel where things will be uploaded today only. Deep Q wave indicates. Next, cardiac biomarker that can be used in both acute and late diagnosis of myocardial infarction is. It is useful in both early diagnosis and late diagnosis. Next, so we know in the normal ECG we have PQRST waves, and in an episode we have also discussed the normal ECG. So I'm not getting into details of how the normal ECG happens. In summary, the P wave is due to atrial depolarization, Q wave is due to septal depolarization, RS waves indicate ventricular depolarization, and T wave represents ventricular repolarization. Now, the areas that are of interest in myocardial infarction are the ST segment, the Q wave, and the T wave. So the ST segment, Q wave, and T wave usually show maximum identifiable problem in myocardial infarction. So what are the different changes that happen in myocardial infarction? Let us go step by step. One very important problem that happens in myocardial infarction are the ST segment changes. We know the ST segment normally is a flat line, meaning it is isoelectric with the TP segment. Now, in myocardial infarction, the ST segment can either get elevated or get depressed. Let us see how these changes would happen. When a person is suffering from myocardial infarction, the myocardial infarction can be subendocardial or it can also be transmural in nature. So if these are the ventricles, and if I am drawing now the ventricular muscle, this is the right ventricular muscle, the septum, and the left ventricular muscle. The right ventricular muscle, which is thinner, the septum, and the left ventricular muscle. Now, when an infarction occurs, the shape of the infarct is different in subendocardial infarct and transmural infarct. In subendocardial infarct, we actually get a very small infarction like this. So it's a crescentic infarction that looks like this. So the area inside is the infarction. Whereas in transmural infarction, the shape of the infarct becomes like this. The pattern can be explained by exploring the blood supply of the myocardium. Because when an artery is entering the myocardium, the artery branches off at these levels. So there is a wedge-shaped infarction. Whereas in case of a large infarction, you may be actually dealing with multiple arteries or branches of multiple arteries. Because there is an overlap between arteries, so even if one artery is damaged, the other end of the artery will save the corner of the infarct. That is why the infarct becomes convex inside and faced outward. Now, what is the problem with these infarcts? Whenever we get an infarct, suppose in any of these cases, this is the infarction that I am talking about. We discussed that an infarction starts losing potassium ion. As the infarction starts losing potassium ion, so the infarction becomes negative. It becomes extremely negative during depolarization. But actually during depolarization, it is supposed to be positive. But now the tissue has become very negative. The surrounding normal tissue can be depolarized properly. So the surrounding tissue is positive during depolarization. But this particular tissue is negative because of loss of potassium ion. We know current flows from positive to negative potential. So now from the normal tissue, there will be development of a current that will flow from outside into the infarct. And this is what I was talking about. This is called the current of injury. Now, in this case, therefore, the current is moving in this direction from the surrounding normal tissue. If I sum up this and make it into a resultant vector, it will be a resultant vector like this. And if there is an overlying electrode over this, then during the ST segment, when the whole ventricle is depolarized, it will find that a current is moving away from it. Moving away means a downward deflection, and this will cause an ST segment depression. So I'm repeating again, a subendocardial infarct causes a current of injury into the myocardium. So the current moves away from the lead that is facing it. So the lead will record it as a downward deflection, and so the ST segment gets depressed. So the ST segment depression typically indicates a subendocardial infarction. Whereas the shape of the infarct, as we see here, is different in transmural. It's directed outward. So the current is moving in this way from the normal tissue into the abnormal tissue. Therefore, the resultant vector will be like this. So if there is a lead that is facing it, the lead will record a current moving towards it, and therefore it will be recorded as a positive deflection. This will result in ST segment elevation. So ST elevation will mean that there is a transmural infarct. So is this concept clear to everyone? Now, coming to the changes that we have in other parts of the ECG. Another very important part of the ECG that is affected is the Q wave. The Q wave is caused by septal depolarization. So if I represent this diagrammatically, suppose this is the heart. This is the interventricular septum. So at first, as current enters the ventricle, we have learned that the septum depolarizes from left to right. Therefore, if there is a lead on the left hand side, for example, I'm talking of, suppose the lead V5. So this lead will see that a current is moving away from this. And as a result, it will record a negative deflection. And this wave is known as Q wave. This is a normal phenomenon. So the Q wave represents septal depolarization in the left-sided leads like V5. Now, the interesting part is that the size of the Q wave that we see in a normal ECG is actually less than the size of the vector. Because unlike the other things that are happening on the surface of the ventricle, this is happening inside the ventricle. The ventricle, being a conducting tissue, acts as an electric screen. As a result, the full size of the vector is never revealed. The lead finds that a vector of this size is moving, and accordingly it records a Q wave. Now when there is myocardial infarction, this causes death of the tissue. So a large part of the tissue has been damaged. The dead tissue is no longer an electrical tissue because it's dead. So it no longer causes screening of the septal vector. So now the septal vector reveals its actual size, and therefore the recording of the Q wave also becomes deep. And this is known as a deep Q wave or pathological Q wave. So essentially, loss of the electrical activity in a dead tissue causes a window to be created, an electrical window through which you can look at the original size of the vector. And so the recording now records the original size of the vector, which is bigger than the previously recorded size. And this is how a pathological Q wave develops. It develops after the whole tissue has died. So it is one of the last changes in myocardial infarction. And after it happens, it remains for the rest of the life because the dead tissue remains dead for the rest of the life. So it usually indicates an old infarct or late manifestation of a recent infarct. So recent infarction is never identified by a pathological Q wave. A Q wave is usually reminiscent of an old or earlier infarct. I hope this is clear to everyone. Finally comes certain changes in the T wave. The mechanism of changes of the T wave are not very clear. At the beginning of the myocardial infarction, T wave becomes tall, and this is called hyperacute T wave. This is probably caused by the injury current that is directed outwards. And later in the process, we see that the Q wave becomes inverted. This is probably because of a delayed depolarization and repolarization of the ventricle. So these are actually elaborate topics and needs a lot of debate because T waves are one of the least understood waves of ECG. So I'm just stating it phenomenologically that in the early stage you get a hyperacute T wave and in the late stage you get inverted T wave. The ST segment and Q wave changes are not permanent. They will resolve with time. But it is only the Q wave that becomes permanent and that remains throughout the life of the patient. So we can say that the changes that we see in the ECG sequentially are, at first there will be a tall T wave that is followed by ST segment elevation in case of transmural infarct. This is followed by a deep Q wave and T wave inversion. Gradually the ST segment improves. Gradually the T wave becomes normal, but the Q waves will persist for the rest of the life. So this is the evolution of ECG changes in myocardial infarction. in a classic transmural myocardial infarction. I hope this is clear to everyone. So electrically or electrophysiologically, we can classify myocardial infarction into ST elevation myocardial infarction, where ST segment is elevated, and non-ST elevation myocardial infarction, which overlaps a lot with unstable angina. By the presence of Q wave, we can say that infarction can be Q wave myocardial infarction or can be non-Q wave myocardial infarction. In general, if it is transmural infarction, it will be STEMI as well as Q wave. If it is subendocardial infarction, it will be NSTEMI and non-Q wave. But sometimes there are some overlaps due to some other added factors. So in summary, these are the ECG changes. Now coming to the cardiac biomarkers. Whenever the heart tissue is injured, the components of the heart inside the cell start coming out into the circulation and their level start increasing in the blood because the cell has ruptured and contents of the cell are now coming out. Now, the important elements that come out in the blood are the different kinds of proteins that are present inside the heart. So what are the important cardiac biomarkers? The important cardiac biomarkers include creatine kinase, MB isoform or CKMB. CKMB typically starts rising within 6 hours of the myocardial infarction. It reaches a peak by 24 hours. It starts falling by the 4th day. It actually disappears by the 4th day. So it starts falling by 48 hours and it disappears completely by the 4th day. So in general, by 4th day, CKMB's diagnostic value is lost. So we can say that CKMB is an early marker of myocardial infarction. Another important marker is LDH isoform 1, which is present in the heart. The LDH1 starts rising by 48 hours. It reaches a peak by the 4th day. It starts falling by the 7th day and disappears by 4th week. Now, by the 2nd week, that is 14th day. So in summary, LDH1 can be a late marker of myocardial infarction. The advantages of both are shared by the cardiac troponins. Troponin T is commonly measured. However, troponin I is a more sensitive marker. Troponin starts rising within 6 hours and disappears by the 14th day. Normally, troponin is not present in blood, so its presence indicates an abnormality. And therefore, it has both the advantages of being an early marker as well as a late marker. Apart from this, there are many modern markers like serum and urine myoglobin, and these can also help in understanding the nature and the extent of the cardiac injury. So in summary, when there is acute chest pain, we do an ECG. In some cases, there may be ST elevation. In some cases, there may be no ST elevation. If there is no ST elevation, it can be NSTEMI or unstable angina. There is a difference in the nomenclature. Some authorities say they are the same thing. Some authorities say that if there is no ST elevation, you check the troponin T. If troponin T is negative, you call it unstable angina. If it is positive, you call it NSTEMI. So opinions vary. Thankfully, the treatment is almost same. If there is ST elevation, then it is ST elevation myocardial infarction. With time, majority of the N-STEMI will turn into non-Q wave myocardial infarction, and majority of the STEMI will turn into Q wave myocardial infarction. But due to confounding variables like other forms of injury, there may be a slight overlap in some cases. So this is a summary of the different acute coronary syndromes. And I hope this is clear to everyone. Let us start with the questions again. So ST segment elevation indicates what? Wonderful. Transmural infarction. Deep Q wave indicates. Very good. An old infarction. Cardiac biomarker that can be used in both early and late cases. Yes, the answer is troponin T. With this, we end the second section, and the last section is management of myocardial infarction. Let us start with a few MCQs. When you successfully reperfuse, that is, remove the clot in coronary thrombosis, what happens? Next question. Cardiac remodeling, that is fibrosis, is prevented by. Next question. Chance of hypersensitivity is highest with. Next question, and the last question. Beta blockers help in. Okay. So what are the investigations that we do? There are some baseline tests that are done in every patient because they always give us some information. We will do a complete blood count. There may be neutrophilic leukocytosis and there may be raised ESR. These are all indications that tissue is getting injured. We will do serum creatinine assay because if there is cardiogenic shock, serum creatinine will rise. We will measure the blood glucose because the patient may be diabetic. And it has many implications. Diabetic patients have higher chance of myocardial infarction. Diabetic patients during myocardial infarction, which is a stress, can develop various hyperglycemic complications like ketoacidosis. Measure the serum electrolytes because they can contribute to the development of arrhythmia. A chest X-ray might show pulmonary edema. An ECG might show the classical changes helping in diagnosis and staging. The special tests that we do include assay of the cardiac enzymes, that is CKMB and LDH1, assay of the cardiac protein, that is troponin I and T. We can also do thallium and stannous pyrophosphate scanning. These are radionuclide scannings. Thallium 201 selectively stains the healthy tissue. So we can identify the dead tissue by lack of stain. Whereas stannous pyrophosphate selectively stains the dead tissue, and so the infarcted area appears as a hot spot, the spot taking up the stain. Additionally, you also do a lipid profile and thyroid profile because patients who have coronary heart disease often have dyslipidemia and thyroid dysfunction. Once the tests are done, prepare the patient for treatment. Thrombolysis can be done with any agent that stimulates the plasminogen system. Streptokinase is a bacterial protein. It's obtained from group C Streptococcus. So although it's relatively inexpensive, its uh, potential to cause allergy or hypersensitivity is high. Anistreptase is the same streptokinase conjugated with plasminogen. So it remains equally antigenic. But the recombinant tissue plasminogen activators are human plasminogen, so they do not cause hypersensitivity. They include alteplase, reteplase, and tenecteplase. So streptokinase and anistreptase, both having the bacterial protein in it, are antigenic. All of them act by activating plasminogen to plasmin, which then dissolves the fibrin into fibrin degradation products. Once successful thrombolysis has happened, more and more proteins from the dead cell come outside. So the CKMB level will rise. The rise in the CKMB level here is not a bad prognostic factor. It is good. It indicates that the thrombolysis has been successful. There are various contraindications of thrombolysis, mostly related to bleeding disorder. Some of them are absolute contraindication, some of them are relative contraindication. You can pause and go through this YouTube video again and again to note them down. Most of them are statistically determined. Now, how do we manage a case of myocardial infarction? We have already discussed this in the pathophysiology chart. Here I am just summarizing the key elements. So the medical management includes giving moist oxygen. 2 aspirin tablets of 75 milligram should be beaten and swallowed. Nitrates like glyceryl trinitrate or isosorbide dinitrate are given sublingually. They can be given at 5 to 10 minutes interval, maximum up to 4 tablets. Injection morphine sulfate is given by slow intravenous injection. Not more than 4 such injections of 4 milligram should be administered. It can cause cardiac depression. Morphine acts by venodilation, relief of pulmonary edema, and relief of the pain and sympathetic hyperactivity. Beta blockers and ACE inhibitors are called the survival beneficiary drugs. So that these drugs increase the survival of the patient. They reduce remodeling, they prevent diastolic failure, and beta blockers specifically reduce arrhythmia and size of the infarct. If the patient reaches within 2 hours and there is no contraindication of thrombolysis, then we can do thrombolysis. Thrombolysis should not be done after 6 hours as there is chance of ischemia reperfusion injury. So this is the medical management. Surgically, we can either put a stent in the clogged artery. This is called PCI or percutaneous coronary intervention. Or we can use a venous graft to create a new bypass channel. This is called coronary artery bypass grafting. These are the surgical options of treating a patient with ischemic heart disease. So that was all. Let us solve the MCQs once again. So successful reperfusion is associated with what? Wonderful. Increased CKMB. Cardiac remodeling is prevented by. It is prevented by the ACE inhibitors. Chance of hypersensitivity is highest with. So which one is the foreign protein here? It is anistreptase. Half of it is bacterial and the other half is human. And finally, beta blockers help in what? Wonderful, all of the above. So that was essentially today's presentation, and I hope you have enjoyed the session. You can also watch this video once again in YouTube, pause the video and note down important points.